Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. And if you are looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today, we are doing chapter 88 of The Captain's Heart. Jeremy took the circuit out and of the tested and what? Squeeze into the space open. Oh, tester of the tester and squeezed into the space in the space of the open weight machine to install it. With so much space available to him, he'd intended to have the weight machine moved to his quarters, but the person from Custodial, who he had replied to his request, had asked if he'd mind leaving it where it was, as someone other than him was using it. That had surprised him. Kelsirians didn't do those kinds of workouts. There had been a near breakdown after this when he'd wondered if they'd lied to him about it. Like the monster, if they'd lied to him, if they'd lied to him about it, like the monster they were, there had been a near breakdown. Okay, this is not a near breakdown. Da, 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 da. Wondering if they'd lied to him about it, like the monster they were, had devolved into pure paranoia. He tried to contact someone, anyone, to reassure him, to rescue him, but he'd been horrified to realize none of the names he was looking for were on his tablet. The only names there were Kelsirians. As he'd devolved deeper into panic, he'd inexplicably fallen asleep. When he'd woken up, there had been a message from the psychologist asking if he was well, that they detected his state and had released a sleeping agent when it was obvious he wasn't regaining control. Then had come the offer for her to visit him so they could talk. He hadn't panicked, but he had vehemently refused. Once he'd gotten over the entire incident, he realized that this was a perfect opportunity to build a new version, one incorporating the ideas he'd had from using the first one, but couldn't upgrade it because it would have required rendering it inoperable for too long. Now, something like 2 weeks in, he had this model nearly functional. It was lighter and smaller, while able to assume all the needed configuration for the exercises he needed. I don't need it twice. To assume all the configurations for the exercise he needed. His tablet buzzed, and he looked over at Tarikna's suggestion for the control circuits. He replied, explaining the details he thought she misunderstood from the ongoing conversation, which he suspected was due to her difficulty in understanding the small size of his machine. Since he had his tablet in hand, he replied to Thoric, confirming he was fine, that he hadn't started with his session, and that, yes, he hoped to get back to work soon. Practiros were similar, although without asking about the psychologist. He let Xeniel know he was getting low on coffee, and when did he think he would be able to get more? The reply was that he'd find a bag of beans the next time he opened his door. Jeremy had been tempted to head to it now and put that to the test. Then the idea he might catch his friend in the act of placing the bag stopped him. The idea of being face to face with one of them caused him to tremble. When he had regained control of himself, he thanked him and continued through the messages. He was surprised to have one from Quirik, who had heard about his ordeal and wanted to assure him he trusted in the gods to see to it he'd be well and those responsible would pay. He replied, unsure if it would reach him. This was his first time sending a message to someone not on the ship. He avoided the subject of gods and thanked him for the thought and assured him he was improving. He just being able to communicate through text like this was an improvement. A week before, the knowledge he could only talk to Kelsirians would cause him to shake with fear. As he did each time he went through his messages, he attempted to write to Growl, teeth and claws. Jeremy's in a... You know what? This goes here. Teeth and claws. Jeremy in a corner being torn apart or by the cock forced... The cock forced into him, his mother on that tray, his sister screaming. He wrenched his mind out of the programmed horror show and ran to the toilet. This time he made it, instead of throwing up on the floor. Then he set back to work. Had 1 kilo, he said, and waited for the acknowledgement ping. He didn't feel the difference when he pushed the bar up, but it was only 1 kilo. This was a test of the audio pickup and conversation. Conversion, a check of his tablet, showed the weight at 88 kilos, so that worked. Add 10 kilos. The number went up to 93, but when he pushed the bar, it moved too easily. So the problem was between the processing and gravitic adjuster this time. He moved to his drafting table and brought up a diagram to diagnose the issue. His tablet pinged. This meant someone was contacting him through audio this time. He settled his breathing. This was no different from text. He tapped the accept. Technician Jeremy Bradshaw, the woman said. I believe we have a session scheduled. I know. He traced the path of the signal. I'll be there as soon as I'm done with this. If it is easier, I can join you in your apartment. No! He looked around, certain she was already there, ready to... He was here alone. This was his safe place, which was why he wasn't letting her in here, any of them. It might be best if we postpone it then. His voice barely shook this time. It's the 3rd time you have asked for a postponement, technician. This is now feeling like avoidance, so I have to refuse. I can always not show up, and it is within my authority to open your door and force the issue, technician. I'm asking you to come to me so we can work on resolving your situation without invading your apartment. He couldn't avoid it, and he couldn't have one of them in the place he felt safe, which meant he had to brave the outside. Where they were, I don't know if he looked at the doors direction. The fear wasn't his. He didn't have to let it control his life. He didn't want it to control his life. He wanted his life back, his heart back, and he couldn't do that hiding in here where it was safe or by himself. He needed help beyond his friend's support, help she could provide. I'm on my way. The office she'd taken to help him was 3 intersections toward the hall, barely a minute's walk. He'd memorized the path when she contacted him to arrange the first session. Just thinking about having to brave the outside had made it impossible to think that time. He'd needed over an hour and multiple attempts before he could look at the path on his tablet and imagine himself walking it. Now he was going to do it. All he needed to do was open the door, step outside, and make a left. Go by 3 intersections, where Kelsirians might be watching for him. Then it was 2 doors, any of which could open and Kelsirian grab him, and he rested his head on the door and forced his breathing to slow. He had to do it. Regardless of the risk, the alternative was the certainty that his sanctum would be invaded. He also didn't think she'd give him a warning if she was on her way. He opened the door and leaned forward, looking left and right. No one that he could see, the programming whispered. So many doors between here and there, where she waited for him, waited and schemed. And he missed the box. It had made things so much easier. Shoved shove his feeling in it, and go on with what he wanted to do. Now, when he set a foot past the door, it was against the voice screaming he was heading for a trap, that he couldn't trust her or any of them. They all worked for him, the golden-eyed monster. The one who would rend him, use him, abuse him. He was his love. He forced the thought. His heart. The one he wanted to go back to. He was doing this to be with him again. He stepped out of his sanctuary and turned left. There was no one. So he started forward, only to stop at the sound of voices. They were coming to get him. They were coming for him. He had to hide, go back where it was safe. This had been a trap, after all. He didn't move. He wanted to move, to run back, but fear held him in place, and the voices faded in the distance. He wanted to laugh at how the fear programmed into him had been the only reason he'd stayed there, to hear them walk off. But he was still shaking, sweating from the almost encounter. The voice still yelled at him to turn back. This had almost happened, but the next time they would pounce on him before he heard them. He took a step forward, then another. He remained alert for any hints of them walking, or of them, for any hints that one of them was around, any voice, the soft pricking of the thick flooring as their claws dug into it and pulled as they walked. How much work was that for repairs to deal with? When he stood before the door where she waited for him, he was panting hard. The button was blue, waiting for him to tap it and open the door. It was not too late. The voice urged him. He could turn around. He could turn and run, go back to hiding where it was safe. She'd lied. She would never violate a safe place. The voice was right. She wouldn't. Actually, this needs to be flipped. What happened here? No, it didn't. The voice was right, Jeremy realized. She wouldn't. If he returned to his quarters, she'd be disappointed. He'd almost made it, but she wouldn't intrude. Her job was to help him, not hurt him. Not create a situation where he'd fear every sound in the one place on the ship he had left. He thought he heard the voice rejoice. Then he opened the door. The vastness of the room was the first thing he noticed, even for a species that valued having more room than he'd ever figure out what to do with. This was more than one room should be. Then he noticed the marks on the walls, where other walls had been removed. This section was for dignitaries, Thurk had told them. So they were all as spacious as his, and they'd turned this into a single room. He noticed a woman seated at the other end of it, then the plant on the low table before her. It had dark green stem with lighter green leaves with purple edges. It was so out of place he chuckled. Then he realized it wasn't it that was out of place, but the barrenness of the room. I was expecting an office, he said, stepping in and stopping as the door closed. He was trapped with her. I thought you might prefer there be more distance between us. She motioned to a seat facing her, more than 10 meters away, and he frowned and stepped past it until he reached the oddity. He placed his hand on the clear surface. Maintenance assures me that I couldn't claw my way through it to reach you, even with the best combat glove the hunters use. He tapped it with a knuckle. It was thick. He knew half a dozen transparent polymer this could be, and the weakest would withstand a pneumatic hammer. He sat at the edge of the seat. Oh, what do we do now? She smiled. Whatever you want. You came. You stepped outside your comfort zone, crossed the distance to reach me. Even once you realize I wouldn't intrude on your security, on your safety. Safety? If you turned back, you defied your fear and entered. For now, I consider this session a success. But if there's anything you wish to talk about, I'm here to listen. She'd given him permission to leave, go back where it was safe. He chuckled. Safe? Safe was an illusion. Living was putting his life in danger. He was on a ship in the middle of vacuum. How safe was that? His field was antimatter research, possibly the most dangerous field possible. If he'd wanted safe, he should have become an architect and stayed on Earth. He leaned back in the seat, then fell into the bowl with a laugh. He thought it might turn hysterical, but it settled. He panted, righted himself, pulling his legs in the way Kelsirians did so easily. I'm pissed, he finally said, and she nodded. And that concludes chapter 88 of The Captain's Heart. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter will be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read this story, it is available on Ream Story. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. Links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.